The gig economy and stagnant wages have created a novel safety hazard invisible to traditional workplace protections. Cumulative fatigue across multiple employers, none of whom know or bear responsibility for total hours worked. A warehouse worker completes 40 hours at Amazon, adds 20 hours driving for Uber, and weekends delivering for DoorDash, total weekly hours approaching 80. Sleep averages 5 hours nightly. Accident risk is astronomical, yet no single employer sees the complete picture or bears accountability for the resulting exhaustion. Economic necessity, not choice, drives this phenomenon. Real wages for working-class Americans have stagnated for decades, while costs for housing, healthcare, and education skyrocketed. A single full-time job no longer provides basic subsistence for many families. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports millions of Americans work multiple jobs, but this undercounts gig work and informal employment. The lived reality exceeds official statistics. Talk to service workers and you'll find 2, 3, sometimes 4 income streams necessary for survival. The physiological consequences mirror single-employer overtime, but with worse invisibility. Chronic sleep deprivation accumulates over weeks, cognitive impairment reaches levels equivalent to legal intoxication, and accident risk increases exponentially. The difference: with visible overwork by one employer, OSHA could potentially intervene or workers' compensation might assign liability. With distributed overwork, the exhaustion remains invisible. The nurse working hospital shifts plus nursing home overtime might total 65 hours weekly, but each employer sees only part-time work and assumes adequate rest between shifts that doesn't exist. Specific risk scenarios demand attention. Healthcare workers combine hospital shifts with home health visits or additional per diem nursing, accumulating 60 to 70 hours weekly in physically and cognitively demanding work where errors kill patients or injure workers during patient transfers. Construction workers labor full-time for contractors, then weekend for cash payment side work, cumulative physical strain causing injuries that no single employer's workers' compensation might cover. Truck drivers max out hours of service regulations for primary employers, then drive personal vehicles for delivery services. The fatigue-related accident risk affects both commercial and public roads. The liability question remains legally murky. If an exhausted worker operating on 4 hours of sleep injures a coworker, who bears responsibility? The employer where the accident occurred? Other employers whose demands contributed to the fatigue? The worker for choosing unsustainable hours? Workers' compensation no-fault systems pay regardless, but prevention requires accountability that current systems don't assign. Employers can claim they assigned reasonable hours, ignoring that workers' total exposure far exceeds safety limits. Legal gaps enable dangerous situations. No federal law limits total work hours across multiple employers. Some states have daily overtime requirements, but enforcement assumes honest reporting of hours worked elsewhere, something workers fear will cost all jobs if disclosed. Hours of service regulations for truckers don't track driving for different companies or gig platforms. Each employer operates in isolation, assuming workers rest between shifts that actually don't exist. The gig economy platforms particularly enable exploitation through opacity. Uber, DoorDash, and similar companies classify workers as independent contractors, disclaiming employment relationships and associated responsibilities. These platforms don't coordinate with workers' other employment, don't limit hours, and disclaim liability for fatigue-related accidents. A driver who crashes after 18 hours across multiple platforms becomes a tragic individual failing, not a systemic safety breakdown. Harm reduction strategies for affected workers have limits, but matter. Honest self-assessment of total weekly hours and actual sleep is essential. Many workers practice denial about their exhaustion. Strategic scheduling that protects minimum sleep, even if it means declining lucrative shifts, preserves life and function. Prioritizing the more dangerous job when allocating alertness. Better to be tired while delivering food than while operating forklifts. Some workers negotiate disclosure with their safest, Most stable employer, hoping flexibility accommodates rather than terminates. The structural critique must remain central. Multiple job necessity indicates wage failure. If one full-time job paid a living wage, workers wouldn't risk their lives and others through exhaustion. The cultural glorification of hustle culture and side hustles obscures that this often represents desperate survival, not ambitious entrepreneurship. The person working 3 jobs is an admirable grinder, but victim of an economy that refuses to pay subsistence wages. Policy solutions could address this crisis. Living wage laws eliminating multiple job necessity would solve it at the root. Cross-employer hours tracking, while complex, could prevent dangerous total accumulation. Reclassifying gig workers as employees would impose hours limits and liability. Strengthening workers' rights to refuse overtime without retaliation would let workers protect themselves. Until such reforms, workers will continue navigating impossible choices between financial survival and physical safety, sometimes dying from exhaustion that no single employer will acknowledge responsibility for causing.